Sanfilippo Syndrome by Zoha Awan. What is Sanfilippo Syndrome? Sanfilippo Syndrome, also known as mucopolysaccharidosis type 3, or MPS 3, is a rare, genetically inherited disease that primarily affects the brain and spinal cord. It is caused by a buildup of large sugar molecules called glycosaminoglycans or mucopolysaccharides in the body's lysosomes. The genetics behind Sanfilippo syndrome. Mutations in 4 different genes can lead to Sanfilippo syndrome. The 4 subtypes of the disease are type A, B, C, and D, with each subtype corresponding to a lack of a different enzyme. In all 4 subtypes, a genetic variation results in the inability to properly break down heparan sulfate, which then builds up in the body's tissues. Heparan sulfate plays an important role in the recruitment, rolling, and firm adhesion of leukocytes to activated endothelium and is modified during this process. It is found at the surface of the cell and in the extracellular matrix, where it interacts with a plethora of ligands. The accumulation of the heparan sulfate causes damage to the cells of the central nervous system, including the brain. This is the structure of heparan sulfate, one of the molecules that builds up in the tissues of those diagnosed with Sanfilippo syndrome. Sanfilippo syndrome is inherited in an autosomal recessive pattern. This means that both parents have one copy of the altered gene and one normal copy. They are known as carriers and do not show signs of the condition. A child with Sanfilippo syndrome inherits 2 copies of the altered gene, one from each parent. Sanfilippo syndrome is referred to as a lysosomal storage disease because the heparan sulfate is stored in the lysosome. Lysosomes contain specific proteins or enzymes that are responsible for breaking down molecules such as fats and sugars. Individuals with a lysosomal storage disorder lack one of the necessary enzymes or do not have one of the enzymes in large enough quantities to break down the molecules for cells to function properly. This is a diagram showing the autosomal recessive inheritance of Sanfilippo syndrome and how a child will inherit the disease. What are the symptoms of Sanfilippo syndrome? The symptoms of Sanfilippo syndrome can vary significantly depending on the subtype of the disease. Even within a specific subtype, there is a high degree of variation in the number of symptoms and their severity. Affected infants usually appear normal, although some mild facial dysmorphia may be visible and noticeable. Most symptoms begin to develop in early childhood. Some signs and symptoms of Sanfilippo syndrome include delayed speech, developmental regression, an intellectual disability, seizures, and movement disorders. Over time, symptoms children might also develop include arthritis, hearing loss, and a visual impairment. This is a photo progression showing the facial coarsening in a child with Sanfilippo syndrome alongside their unaffected sibling. Sanfilippo syndrome is often referred to as a form of childhood dementia or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, better known as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. As the brain progressively receives more damage, children experience severe hyperactivity, disordered sleep, cognitive decline, cardiac issues, loss of mobility, and finally death, usually all before adulthood. How is Sanfilippo syndrome diagnosed? Sanfilippo syndrome can be diagnosed with a urinalysis because it can show elevated levels of heparan sulfate as well as increased levels of glycosaminoglycans in the urine. The diagnosis can also be confirmed with an enzyme assay of skin fibroblasts and white blood cells. The enzyme assay is considered the most accurate diagnostic tool because it detects whether the enzymes breaking down the heparan sulfate are present or not. Another tool that can be used to diagnose Sanfilippo syndrome is gene sequencing. Treatment. There is currently no cure for children diagnosed with Sanfilippo syndrome. However, researchers and medical professionals around the world have developed multiple effective treatment options, and many more are currently in the testing phase through clinical trials. The current available treatment options are largely supportive. Children with Sanfilippo syndrome are usually managed by a multidisciplinary team of specialists to give them the best quality of life possible. At different stages, this could include a combination of the following specialists, such as a neurologist, developmental pediatrician, metabolic and genetic specialist, gastroenterologist, cardiologist, endocrinologist, physical therapist, behavioral therapist, speech therapist, and an ear, nose, and throat specialist. The goal of all of these doctors and specialists is to better manage the symptoms of the disease. Current investigational therapies are showing promising results. Among the most promising is gene therapy. Gene therapy involves using a harmless virus to deliver a functional copy of the altered gene into the body. Gene-modified stem cell therapy is also being tested, in which stem cells are removed from the body, the genetic error is corrected, and then the stem cells are transplanted back into the body. These are potential therapeutic approaches to treat Sanfilippo syndrome. Affected population. Sanfilippo syndrome is classified as a rare disease. There are reported to be between 0.028 and 4.1 cases per 100,000 births. Sanfilippo type A is the most common subtype, affecting around 1 in 100,000 births. Sanfilippo type B is second, with 1 in 200,000 births. However, in some countries in Southern Europe, type B has been reported to be more common than A. Sanfilippo type C affects 1 in 1.5 million births. Sanfilippo type D affects 1 in 1 million births. The occurrence of Sanfilippo syndrome varies geographically, with approximately 1 case per 70,000 births in the United States, 1 case per 280,000 births in Northern Ireland, 1 case per 66,000 births in Australia, and 1 case per 50,000 births in the Netherlands. This is a table showing the summary of reported prevalence studies of Sanfilippo syndrome.